Welcome to Safe on Deck. For episode 34, I sat down with Captain Ian McIntyre at his home in Pace, Florida. After college, Captain McIntyre served as a professional civilian merchant mariner for 5 years before joining the United States Navy in 1986. Over a 27-year career on active duty, Captain McIntyre remained in the cockpit for a now unheard-of 7 flying tours in the MH-53 Delta Sea Stallion and the MH-53 Echo Sea Dragon. In 1991, Captain McIntyre became the first MH-53 Sea Dragon mission commander to cut a live moored contact mine during Operation Desert Storm. And he bookended his operational flying career when he returned to the Northern Arabian Gulf as the commanding officer of Helicopter Mine Countermeasure Squadron 14 in 2003 during Operation Enduring Freedom. Captain McIntyre went on to serve in a variety of leadership roles within the Navy Reserve, including as commanding officer of Joint Reserve Base Fort Worth. Thanks for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, episode 34, with Captain Ian McIntyre. Enjoy. And I know we talked through this briefly the last time, so I'll try to glaze over it if that's okay, just because I now finally have all this working, and last time my tape recorder did not work properly. So let's see. Where were you born? Like that's how far back we'll go.
Wow. I forget.
A burst of light?
Maine.
Okay.
Yeah, Maine.
Up in Maine. Okay. College time frame? High school to college? I'm trying to think anything real remarkable. I remember you mentioned aviation briefly as an interest, but that was once you'd already joined.
Oh, always interested in looking up at airplanes. Always, looked skyward. Didn't get any flight lessons until I was 25 because I went off to the Merchant Marine and I was off doing merchant mariner stuff from age 18.
So always had that interest, but first chance to fly. And I remember you told me what kind of airplane it was in.
Piper Archer.
Yep.
180 out of Baton Rouge Airport, Ryan Field.
Do you remember that first flight in an airplane?
Actually, I flew with a flight school, the Cessna dealership / flight school. There was a guy named Emil Salas that ran that, and he had a couple of 152s, one with a spinner, one without, kind of ramshackle airplanes. Shortly after I left his flight school and went elsewhere, one of those airplanes landed on the interstate and had a problem. So I can't say anything about the maintenance other than that airplane had a problem. It was probably good that I moved away from Emil. Emil was an older gentleman, lived in a trailer right there on the airfield, and had a wife in her 20s with a baby on her hip, and this guy was in his 50s, 60s. So it was an interesting family dynamic. And plus, he was living in a large trailer right there behind the Cessna Flight School.
Was he? You said he was the one that flew with you?
No.
Oh, no. He just owned the place.
I think I remember the first instructor I flew with, his name was Rick Vandiver, or something like that. It's in my logbook someplace, and it's illegible. He was 19, and he was he'd been doing some crop dusting, and he was building time to go to the airlines. And he's 19, and I'm 25, and I have all these professional qualifications for the maritime world. I know how to speak on a radio, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't help me when I got into the airplane because that was totally new. So I thought it's kind of weird. This guy doesn't have a college degree, doesn't have any engineering background, but he's the instructor, and I'm the student. And I didn't really get a lot from him. He wasn't. I wasn't with him long enough to get good instruction. And then I moved over to Duffard's flying service. Eddie Duffard had been soloing people off in Baton Rouge since 1947. He had over 40,000 hours of flight time. He worked for Ethel Corporation in Baton Rouge, one of the big chemical plants, and he was a real Cajun, thick Cajun accent, and I think he'd owned about 12 or 13 airplanes by the time he was done. But he gave flying lessons. That was his passion. And so I moved from Emil Salas's Cessna. It was kind of an afterthought flight school, even though it had the Cessna marquee. You were just kind of left to your own devices. And then Eddie was a very personable man and real man's man, as far as you need to do it this way, don't do that, and et cetera. And he soloed off a lot of people that went off to military careers, and they'd come back and bring pictures, and I was I brought back a picture of 53 for him, and he hung it up in his office. I think he finally died just short of 90. He was still giving flight instruction right to the very end.
That's incredible.
Yeah, he was a real character. They named a road at the airport Duffard Road. He was well known there. So I fell into good hands for
Absolutely.
my initial flight training. Eddie Duffard was a good experience for the 25 hours I got in his Piper Archer, and then went off to the Navy, and none of it helped me with the Navy at all.
At all?
No, none.
Really? No. I was going to say not even the confidence of you'd flown an airplane before, even the very basics?
T-34 moves so much faster.
True.
They fly a racetrack pattern. They don't square the corners. And it was just no help at all. I'll tell you right now. It was
that's fair.
No help at all. The radio calls were different. So you learn to do it the Navy way.
Absolutely.
That's how it's supposed to be.
So speaking of the Navy way, trying to remember, and again, a little bit different. So I went to OCS in Newport, Rhode Island, and then came down here. You were a commissioned in the Navy Reserve prior to getting picked up? And I apologize because I'm going back in my brain here to try to remember. I know you talked me through all this.
The Marine Academy is a commissioning source. You
Correct.
take naval science. It's just like ROTC.
But commissioned as a reserve commission,
as
correct?
An ensign,
Okay.
USNR/R, the Ready Reserve. And you wouldn't be called unless there was a mobilization requiring merchant ships to be manned with merchant mariners. They wouldn't recall me for active duty in the sense that you're going to put on a Navy uniform and serve. I wouldn't be any help to them. We are going to pull ships out of the Ready Reserve fleet in the various pre-positioned areas in the U.S. and reactivate them, and you're the manpower that we're going to use. So that's what I was on the hook for, was to do the job I'm doing. Or if I were doing something else ashore, conceivably I could be pulled in. You'd have to look at the history of the recall of the Ready Reserve during Desert Storm. They had some challenges. Some of those ships didn't come out of mothballs as quickly as they should, or out of their 10-day tied to the pier, ready to go type thing. It didn't roll forward as there were a lot of lessons learned that. And we now have less ships, so I guess we're not learning. But that was what my commission was to ensure that I would be available for at least 6 years after graduation for a merchant marine call-up. So it was sort of the super secret Naval Reserve, USNR TAC R. That's the S1, the deep Ready Reserve, that we're not going to call you guys up unless we really mean it.
Yeah, like Desert Storm.
And we're only going to use certain skill sets
okay.
and we're not going to send you off to be Coca-Cola control officer in Adak, Alaska, because that's not, and we're not going to send you off to Afghanistan or Iraq, where you'll arrive to support an Army mission, and the Army will say, "What the hell are you doing here? We didn't know you were coming. Well, we'll have to make a job for you." No, you're being called to go work on merchant ships because you've already been trained for that, and there's a very small pool. So it's a very specialized thing. So yeah, I stepped out of the Merchant Marine Academy with three things: a degree, a license, and a Coast Guard license, and then a commission, which was kind of deep in the back pocket. And I pulled that out later on, before my eyes changed, before I got to age 26, where I could qualify for a flight physical. While there was a pilot drive with the Reagan Navy trying to build to 600 ships, they were looking for people. And I pulled that commission out and dusted it off and called the Navy and said, "I'd like to go on active duty, and I'd like to go directly to flight school." And it's a long story of how I buffaloed my way in. Eventually they picked me up. I was apparently a good risk after I told them that I'm here and I'm interested, for 5.5 months, finally got in.
So where did that journey begin? Here in Pensacola?
Baton Rouge. I was in Baton Rouge in between ships at the time.
Okay.
Started calling the Merchant Marine Reserve program down in New Orleans. Went down to visit several times to meet the folks, and they were like, "But you already have a commission. You're not in school." "No, I've been out at sea for 3 years, and I'd like to go active duty and go to flight school. And how many times do I have to repeat this?" And eventually, "Well, we'll get you set up for a flight physical, and we'll take the AQT FAR." And I went to the Marine Officer Selection Office at Baton Rouge at their ROTC branch, and they stuck me in a closet, and I took the exam back there. And it's to whether you can you're aeronautically adaptable, and it turned out that I did well on the test, and okay, we'll get you a flight physical. And I got in a van with a bunch of other guys and went down to Belle Chase and met a very nice flight surgeon, female flight surgeon. She was very forward and thorough. I was just going to say she was extraordinarily thorough. Apparently, I did well in that respect, so my eyes and everything else apparently qualified me for flight.
2020, correct?
2020 or 2015.
Still, by the way?
And then no, you got to use reading glasses. It's going to happen to you too.
I know. I'd actually know some folks that their vision improves.
Sense of superiority that I'm getting from you now because you have younger eyes. It's going to wear off.
I was not 2020.
The magic is going to wear off.
I was not 2020 when I joined the Navy. That's the reason I ask. I've really, really read up on the vision stuff because I was just a shade.
Pilot waiver?
Not quite that bad, but
they did that for a while. They bring guys in, and we called it the blind pilot waiver, and they'd give you corrective lenses, and then you could continue.
Okay, so then I guess that's what it was. We never called it the blind pilot waiver.
You got a blind pilot waiver, so don't feel you're anything special.
2030, and then you had to be 2040 uncorrected, correctable to 2020. When you wing, it's 2070 correctable to 2020.
You had to be 2020 unaided back in the day. Yep. And if it changed while you were in training, you were out.
Wow.
Yep. Until you got your wings, then they'd keep you.
Exactly, and it's the same way now for folks. Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, that's how I pushed my way into the Navy. But the Merchant Marine program was Commander Paul Schaefer, remember his name, and 2 petty officers and 3 or 4 filing cabinets with all the people in them. There were no databases. There was no Excel. There's just paper records of all the Merchant Marine graduates out of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, not the state schools, that were lined up for this program. And that's how they kept track of these folks. And they do 2 weeks active duty every year if they weren't sailing in their license. If they were sailing in their license, they do a correspondence course once a year. And if your requirement on graduation was sail for 4 months a year for 4 years on your license, sail for 6 months a year for 3 years on your license, and maintain your U.S. Navy Reserve status for 6 years, meaning you did that sailing, and if you didn't get the 4 months or the 6 months within a year, you could apply and do what they called active duty for training, AT. And you do that for 2 weeks. And 1 year I didn't get enough time, so I signed up, and they sent me to Key West, of all places, where they had the hydrofoils, the PHMs. You don't remember that? They had patrol boats that had hydrofoils, very fast, turbine-powered things. They had those for a while. That was an interesting 2 weeks, but I really wasn't any good. I just got to see how they ordered parts and did this and that, and Key West was kind of interesting. And then I went home. What's my experience on merchant ships? What are you going to use me for as a reserve ensign? There aren't a lot of reserve ensigns. You get reserve lieutenant commanders, guys who've already served and been in the service. My job to support the Navy was to be on a merchant ship. So it was weird to come down there. They expected nothing from me, and I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and that could equate to squirrely. But I was there, and I was aware, conscious, and enthusiastic, and that's all I could do. It was the only thing I had on my uniform was, besides my name tag, was my USNR Eagle, which I don't believe they allow you to wear anymore. They now have a strategic sea lift officer pin that you wear. So the fighting sea chicken that we used to have has been retired. But the last my entire Navy career, I would wear that as my second designator, just to piss people off or start conversation.
Where did you first fly the T-34 for the Navy?
Whiting Field, Northfield.
Okay. Which squadron?
VT6.
I was in VT6.
Club 6. VT6. You showed up, and I'm on board. Yeah, have a seat, study your EPs, and it was a different, more laid back, and better learning. Was it VT3
still had the Air Force back then?
No.
So it was all Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. There was no Air Force.
That hadn't been thought of, and now the Air Force is gone.
The IPs are there. The students are gone.
Yep. Yeah. And the instructor COs. They had Air Force COs. They got rid of that because it didn't meet the Air Force standards. Nothing meets the Air Force standards. That's another tangent.
The ones that I know that are down here, the Air Force instructors at VT3, all love it, because they get to get away from the silliness of the Air Force. It's in the book, and if it's not in the book, you can't do it, as opposed to if it's not.
Proceed until apprehended. That's how the Navy works. Proceed until you're the mission commander. You can sign for that. You don't need somebody else. You go to an Air Force base to do a cross country, and you're going to depart VFR. They won't let you. You got to file. No, I don't need to file. I'm the mission commander, and I'm going to leave. Little airman is not going to, behind the counter is not. He's not even making good coffee. He's not going to tell me how to run my airplane. Off you go.
Yes.
So the Air Force is.
It's a different mindset.
Bookworms.
Any memorable flights or good times? You had a couple solos, right? Because I know for us we had the one just initial solo, an aero solo, and a form solo. But I'm told there used to be multiple aero solos.
No, there's a solo.
Okay.
Then there's a PA-5 acro solo, and then there was a night nav solo. We go up with 3 other guys in a chase plane, night navigation. I think you did a day solo, and it was out to the pumping station at Flomaton, Atmore, Bay Minette, and then Pensacola and back into Whiting.
How did it work for selection in terms of, am I going to be a jet guy, a helicopter guy, a maritime guy?
They just did a selection after intermediates, and you put in your druthers, what you wanted to do. Hey, you want to go off and do T2s. You did those down in Pensacola, and then you went off to do A4s. The rest of the training was in the A4. And if you were going to do E2s, which was low jet grade, then you'd go off and do a bunch of T2 stuff here, and then you go do props in Corpus, and then you'd go to the RAG and be one of the VAW guys.
Gotcha. Do you remember what you put 1, 2, 3?
I could have gone E2s, but I decided I wanted to go 53s. And I wanted to go helos, and okay, he's got the grades for helos. And
gotcha. But you knew about the 53 even back then?
When I got into helos, I was aware of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, what was the training helicopter then?
TH-57 or the Bell 206 Bravo and Charlie.
It was a Bravo? Really? Okay, so I know it wasn't that long ago. For some reason, I thought it was Alpha and
You've
Bravo.
You've forgotten when we talked about continuum.
Yeah.
This is a continuum. The Bell product has been, I think they stopped using the Huey in 82, 83.
Okay.
So it was all, and they've been using your television stations have been flying around since the 60s. In the 206, they're still out there.
It's a great machine.
Why we're moving to another one, I don't know. It makes us feel good. Glass cockpit.
407 would have been the better play in my mind. It's a Bell product, glass cockpit, instruments, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Different discussion for a different time. But what did you think of the TH-53? 53. Listen to me. TH-57.
TH-57.
I'm sorry. All over the place.
It's as small and twitchy as any light helicopter, but ultra reliable. And it flies about like the R-44/R-22 with the stab system and the Charlie. It's a good instrument platform. Yep. It was. I enjoyed the helo training.
Did you fly out of Pace, the OLF here? Do you remember?
No, I went to Spencer, then Santa Rosa at night when we
Same.
did the few night flights for the Gale approaches. And we went to Santa Rosa.
Gale approaches. What's that?
Glide angle indicator lights, the little pancake lights that they set out that have a glide angle, green, like a nighttime fantasy. Yeah, the Gale.
We never did that in the 57.
Okay.
I did not. We did NVG syllabus, but
we didn't have it.
And I was going to say that's what I wanted. One of the things.
That's
I
why
wanted
we
to
had a
talk
Gale.
about.
It's like you get on that glide slope and you're not going to land on anything you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yep. That's why we had a Gale.
Was that a pretty intuitive device?
You just follow the green, red.
It's a VASI
amber.
essentially, just in one light.
It's a VASI with green, red,
yep.
and amber.
So leaving Whiting, where did you go? So I want to reach back. So I know HM12, and make sure I got the order right. 12, 14, 19, 15, 14, 15, 14. And then Panama City was in there in the mix somewhere.
12, 14, 19 blended with 15.
Okay.
When we did the reserve integration. Went back to 14, was an 04 then. Went to 15, they'd moved to Corpus Christi out of Alameda. Picked up commander there, went to War College. Came back, went to 12 again. Went to AWIST, borrowed aircraft to do the, I'd been out of the cockpit for a year, do the retraining. So I could come back as PXO. Finished at 14, 2004, went to Millington and ended up a year there out to Corpus Christi to the NOSC, the Reserve Center. About a year there and some months, and they pulled me over to the base. Very, very unusual. Major command, and then over to another major command. I think the admiral reached in and said, I don't want that guy going there, and they put me in, because after that, the people in the reserve world were firing shells at me and mortars and trying to direct and screw up my career ever after. Somebody got their nose put out of joint that had been promised JRB, and
the
I showed up out of
instead.
nowhere, and I wasn't part of the inner workings of the Reserve World, the New Orleans staff, where guys would go down there, they'd do 4 or 5 staff tours in a row, non-hardware guys, and they'd turn these guys into 06s.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
Okay, so selected the 53 HM12 for the FRS, and I promise I just want to make sure it's all still the same.
Yep.
But the RH-53 Delta.
RH-53
correct?
Delta. Yep.
Okay, how many years, broadly speaking, did you fly the RH?
I flew that my first tour until 1990. We got the MHs. Half the squadron was flying the RH, half was flying the MH, and we did an in-house transition for the guys that already were, H2Ps, seasoned H2Ps. Jumped into the MH, figured that out, and I did my hack ride outside Belle Chase Naval Air Station in New Orleans on a det on the, might have been on the Tripoli, no, on the New Orleans. It was on the New Orleans. Went there to be a floating hotel for the midshipmen who were marching in a Veterans Day parade or something. So we went on the ship on a det and flew out of New Orleans, downtown New Orleans, and it was an interesting exercise that we did. And I did my hack ride in the spring of '90, I think. I have to look at my logbook. And then in October of '90, I was headed off to Desert Storm. So doing FCF, seasoned hack, and right into Desert Storm.
So I wanted to talk about Desert Storm because obviously, again, Ian, a very unique career, but someone that you saw. And that was in the Echo, 53 Echo for Desert Storm. And then when you went back, OEF in 03, again, in a 53 Echo.
In a 53,
Pretty, I don't want to say bookending, because I think that part of the world, even though we want to pivot to the Pacific and all this other stuff, that part of the world seems to demand our attention, whether we want to pay attention or not. Yeah.
We're going. We didn't completely clean up.
No. Not even close.
While we were over there last time. You can't get all the mines. So the risk still, it's never 100%.
Yep.
You can't explain that to the staff or the admiral. I want 100% clearance. You're not going to get it.
Not how it works.
Something's going to be buried. You're going to miss something. We swept after World War II. What do we find in the Baltic every time we go up on a mine warfare exercise? World War II mines. They're still out there.
And they're still lethal. Not most of them, I assume, in some cases, have a way of timing out.
You don't want to be there when they become lethal. You want to identify them and dispose of them, but you don't want to test their lethality.
I've always joked with my incredibly limited knowledge. I mean, you were skipper of an HM squadron. You took this thing to war twice. I don't. But what little I know, the best AMCM is a Hornet or is a strategic bomber taking these damn mines out in port before they ever go on a ship, before they ever get in the water. Because once they get in the water, the very limited reading, Ian, that I did was post-Vietnam, right? And that massive effort, I think it was RH-53 Deltas. It was...
Operation End Sweep, High Fond Harbor.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of those mines just timed out. I think at a certain period of time, they rendered themselves safe, and that was how we certified. They're probably still down there. But
the guys that were in End Sweep were CO, XO, Wing Commander when I first showed up. Year group 66 to 72. And they didn't talk a lot about it. It was an inexact science. It was riverine, riverine clearance, inshore clearance. They didn't have the nav system integrity to be repeatable in revisiting each track with the accuracy we have now. So the tactics and the lessons learned, we didn't learn anything from these guys because they didn't talk about it. Because what happened was, and what the appearance was in the early exercises we did, a lot of times they would control us by radar on the ship. Now think about a ship that's anchored without aid of GPS. Now defining the minefield and saying, drift right, stop, drift left on radar. You got a scope dope trying to... You're never going to come across the same track twice yet. We continued doing exercises. We continued reporting 95% clearance. We continued doing the exercises and reporting, oh yeah, these guys know what they're doing. They're going to go clear the mines and get to 95%. It's a warm, fuzzy number, makes everybody feel good, 95%. When it was a lie. The tactical ability to run over the same track was an absolute fabrication, to the point where I had a commanding officer in an exercise. And I went through these big, fat Navy warfare publications that had been written out in Panama City by a very brilliant man named Bob Bondison. He's a brain. He put together all the hydrographic predictions you could make for scouring when mines would disappear, the effects of kelp hiding things, salinity, determining how well the sonar would work, all the elements that would frustrate your ability to find mines on anything other than a flat, perfect linoleum floor, with water above it. Okay, you're still going to miss some of them. You're still going to miss them. Could hide in between the tracks that you didn't pair perfectly. Well, I went through those books because I was the tactics officer, and I thought, well, I'm a tactics officer. This is how we do our tactics. And there are these nomograms. You put rulers going across to figure out this and that. And I looked at the mine warfare pilots. You ever heard of such a thing?
I've not, no.
Hydrographic surveys that we do for ports, and the mine warfare pilots would tell us about tides and scouring and time for burial. And I went through all that stuff, and I drew up this profile because I'd spent my time in the Merchant Marine looking at tidal effects, as you come into port, knowing what the water volume will be, where the currents will be setting us when we come to this mark, and you're going to know before you go what's affecting you. Well, I wanted to know, how are we going to find these things? What's going to affect them, even if they were just practice shapes that we were trying to find? If you have nothing but kelp beds, you're not going to see them with sonar. You're just going to see waving kelp and just backscatter. And I ran all this stuff through, and I came down to the skipper, and I said, Skipper, they've asked for 95% clearance. Here's what it was going to take. It was going to take 35 days, and it was going to take 15 missions per day, nominal. It's good, to get to this 95% where you could, and I'm not giving anything away classified. I'm talking about the mathematics of how many times you go back and forth, depending on what the bottom conditions are. We know we'll miss because some will be buried, and as time goes by, more will be buried. And this is just if you throw something overboard, it's going to disappear into the silt, and then the sonar's not going to find it. He sent me back and said those numbers aren't right. You need to report 95%. So I had to go back and change the numbers after 6 days of sweeping. So that the message could be released by the skipper at 95%. And I'd already presented him the reality of this is what it's going to take. And what had happened was HM appeared on the horizon as a sort of a bubble club for helicopter pilots. And they kept the secret close to their chest since 78 when HM-14 stood up. And they lied all the way to about 1990 when we got GPS, where we could say, now we know where we are, where we've been, and we can definitely sweep with certainty instead of adding effort on top of the uncertainty to eventually get 95%, which would never happen. No one would allow you 35 days to clear a channel. 35 days, they'd want the entire basin cleared. It's not going to happen. So it was obvious what I had stepped into was the dishonesty, the corporate dishonesty. And nobody outside of tactics wanted to talk about it. And they didn't want you to brief it as the tactics officer because it was unpopular. We have to keep the job programs going. We have to keep, and so we had various nav systems that just didn't work and gear that just didn't work. And we just kept doing exercises to create relevance. But it was all predicated on a lie. A technical lie that, well, they know what's going on down in Panama City because they put this stuff together. If you were a surface guy sweeping, you'd see these same numbers. They use the same pubs. You're not doing it any better with the RH. You're just doing it faster. But Herculean effort to reach the asymptotic approach of the desired number is going to take a lot of effort. You're not going to achieve 95% in 8 days, or in a 10-day exercise. But yet that's what some of these guys between your group 66 and 72, fill in the blanks if you like. Whoever's listening to this will probably be able to place themselves into that.
Yeah.
Will realize that is what that was the lie they persisted in presenting. And I didn't much like that.
You mentioned GPS. Did you all have GPS capability in 91?
Not till 1990. Some guys from Texas Instruments came over with a G-Whiz box, and then the next thing we know, they plopped I think it might have been made by Litton Industries, a GPS that was just point to point. You had to enter the lat long.
Yep.
And then that drove our tapes that calculated where we'd been so they could bring the tapes back and run them through and graphically plot where we've been and see, overlay it on other aircraft and build the effort.
Did y'all have figure of merit? Was that a
figure of merit? Yeah.
Okay, I figured it was the same term that we used as well, because then obviously the
horizontal
GPS
and vertical.
and vertical, because the aircraft is not always exactly perfectly where the GPS thinks it is, unless you have a certain amount of satellites.
It's gotten. I mean, the satellite orbits were just being seeded. They're circumpolar, so it's a bird cage, and they're geosynchronous. They're always there. They're not passing overhead. The initial satellite nav system was called transit. So you waited for a satellite to come over your meridian, and there's where you are. 4 hours later, you'd find out where you were. Maybe 8 hours later, depending on your latitude. And transit was a good open ocean thing, but it wasn't persistent. Here you are, here you are, here you are. So when they went to the geosynchronous birdcage model, then you could, when you turn on your GPS in your airplane, my Avidyne probably picks up 11 satellites, more than it needs, plus the WAS repeater stations on the surface of the Earth that further do the differentiation to make it even more accurate. It's a great system.
Truly is incredible.
That.
Yeah, not at all.
We didn't have all that geosynchronous hardware in the sky until after Desert Storm.
But you went, so you did not go into Desert Storm with that. That's what I was trying to...
We had GPS, but the figure of merit would change at times.
Correct.
And we were still using Omega. You don't remember
I've heard the term Omega navigation.
You've heard of LORAN.
I've heard of LORAN. LORAN, long range navigation.
LORAN, yeah.
It's the acronym.
LORAN A. I trained on LORAN A, which was an oscilloscope. Then they went to LORAN C, which had a readout for lat long, was a time difference measuring system. Omega was a phase difference measuring system, and it was worldwide. You had baseline extension, you had between the baselines, and it was hyperbolic for LORAN C. They had 8 or 10 stations all over the world that transmitted. I think one was La Reunion Island off of the coast of Africa, and it was someplace in the Pacific, and it was good within 60 miles. Sometimes it'd be spot on, but sunspots, it's worldwide, ducting, it would affect it. We would consistently be 60 miles offshore, but that's enough if you haven't had sextant fixes to make an accurate landfall at some point. It's enough if you're moving in a jet, in a B-52 at 350 knots. 70 miles away is about where you're going to get a TACAN. You'll still be able to make landfall and fix things. Plus, you'd have inertial nav, that would decay as you get across the pond. And inertial nav, I'm not sure, was nearly as good as it should be at the upper poles, because the magnetic stuff just does not work as you get in the Arctic and Antarctic area. So it got better, and we were able to use that in Desert Storm, and we knew, where we were. But the story as to how we got to be effective, there was a long period of prevarication and misrepresentation in the 53 community. So
back in 91, you were a aircraft commander?
Yep.
FCP?
Yep.
Was it AHAC? Was that a term?
Yep, HAC,
okay,
AHAC,
so
HTP.
Okay.
Yep.
And I guess kind of the thing I was going to lead up to, you cut an actual mine with a Mark 103.
I did.
I would call that the highlight, but I also don't know the other lights, the other stories of that.
Well, towards the end, as we were cleaning things up, bright sunny day, we're doing a mine warfare lead through. They were going to parade the ships through, and they were going to head to another area, whatever, and they were coming through a mine danger area. An MDA means that there could be mines there. We don't know where they are, if there are mines there, but don't go in there because something bad could happen. So we're doing this lead through, and we're just finishing up some of our effort, and I get this tension surge, and it goes back, and my crewman, Richard Kites, goes, "Sir, we got a mine that just popped up." I said, "Felt the tension surge. The 103 works." So we recovered the gear, because we know the cutter had been expended, because now we have less effectiveness, because you start losing cutters. Now you're really just wasting, you're just out there in the field making motions in the water. Okay, so we recover it, and we come back, and we see it. It's like, report it, and within 20 minutes they send a helo, cast a guy out, a rubber boat, puts an explosive charge on it, and they blow it up. Boom, black smudge in the sky. And the commanding officer of HM-14 claimed that he cut that mine.
Was he flying that day?
No. He claimed that he
oh my.
That was just, it was like, really? I was it's in my logbook, and I was the first one to cut one operationally. He took credit for that.
You were the first one to cut?
Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
That is quite an accomplishment.
Now, here's the other side, continuing with this long tradition of HM prevarication. Where did all those ships go that were going to lead through in this area that we were finishing up sweeping? When we cut a mine in the area we'd been sweeping, what did they do? They offset themselves a couple miles to the right and steamed through the mine danger area because they had to get from point A to point B. You idiots. Here's the safe channel.
Yes.
And we just found out there's a mine in there.
Yeah.
It's not safe. Empirical evidence. Well, boom. And what did you do? You just moved over and kept going.
Was that an accepted tactic, or was that just...
I have no idea.
I certainly don't.
I have no idea why they did that. I wasn't in charge of it.
Of course.
I wasn't in charge of that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were out, fast forward 2003, Iraqi freedom, clearing the approaches to Qasr in the, was it the Euphrates River, I guess? Yeah. And I look off to the side while I'm on a combat mission. I'm going in. We may be fired at from the shore. We don't know who's there. We don't know how well they're going to receive us when we come in. I didn't expect banners and to have babies held up for me to kiss as I flew through. Didn't expect that at all. I'm a realist, okay? And we're charging along. I look off. I see this orange and white. It's got a diagonal stripe on the bow. It's a Coast Guard boat. They had sent some Coast Guard cutters over there. And he's off in the mine danger area. And we're coming in the area that we're supposed to be sweeping. And he's out there stooging around. And nobody should be out here, let alone a Coast Guard cutter, with a pop gun. I was like, I don't have time to call him on the radio. I'm trying to stay on track. And I'm worried about getting shot at when we get in, and we start clearing the harbor. And we towed those sleds underneath the container cranes that were, at the dock, right along the side. And we swept the harbor.
God.
Yeah, it was
That's incredible.
It was some close. I mean, I was just right up underneath the crane and around, and we did. We were hoping to see something blow up in the harbor because we didn't want to send a ship in, tie it up, and have it blow up.
Of course.
And while we're towing into the harbor, we go right past, and this showed up on the news. We go right past the tugboat auxiliary that they used to lay the mines, where they had cut openings in the back where they could slide them out. It was sort of a hidden thing. So the Iraqis had been naughty little boys, had been out there making a mess of the playground. And I flew right past and over, and I look underneath the tarp. It's like, yep, that's the mine layer that they had created, and we went past and swept past that thing. So, yeah, that was kind of interesting. You sometimes you can't keep people safe. They're going to do stupid stuff. And another great story, we sweep faster than everyone else, so they should send us in first, because we'll go faster and farther. And then the ships will come along and do the plotting stuff. So really, you shouldn't sweep mines and follow someone else who's sweeping mines, because the sweep gear is designed to make the mines blow up behind the sweeper. So why follow in someone's wake? Okay, one day we're sweeping, and there's this remote control device that the Australians brought. So yeehaw, we're going to get our tool out here, and some tool sent it off into the stream, didn't tell us, and here we are sweeping along, tied to the sled in a riverine environment. We can't turn around till we get to the headwaters, and we're constrained by our draft because there's mud flats, and here's the MCM ships parked to one side, and now we're following this straight. It's like, I can't keep sweeping behind this guy because he might blow something up. So we had to talk to the staff. We never really could get through to them that you can't put them, you need to deconflict the field when we come in. And the only thing we got back from the field was, could you guys not tow so close to us? Well, listen, I don't think you guys have noticed, but in order for your surface mine countermeasure ships to remain floating, you have to avoid the mud flat. So I understand you're parked up very close to them. We've got a sled that has mag tails and so forth, and I'm going to pull that thing 25 feet close aboard as I go up, because that's where I'm supposed to be sweeping. You need to get out of the way. I'm constrained by my draft just the way you are, and I'm rather busy. I don't have time to talk to you. So the mission will continue unimpeded, like it or not, cowboy. And that was the sort of sentiment that you would get from the surface warfare officers who were now in charge of the aviation asset. It was part of the AMCM mission, is they could never understand how we did our mission. We're not a ship. Okay, and it's more dangerous for us, and we'll get more done for you, and then you can come in and do the plotting cleanup. But for now, we need to deconflict. And the staff could not get that up to the, at that time there was a guy who was an EOD diver who was the Commodore in charge of that. And I think he just delighted in frustrating aviators. And his staff had informed him that he can extend the maintenance life on parts as much as he wants because we're in wartime. Now, there are some things in wartime that you don't have to remove on an hour basis. You can add a percentage. And he kept one aircraft tied to the deck because he wanted to have a helo ready to go someplace. I said, Captain, Commodore, you can't expect that aircraft to work after being chained down to the deck for 10 days. We take parts from it. He didn't want us to take parts from it. That's how we stay in the air. We swap things out. We move things around. That thing isn't going to start after 10 days. That's not a Harley you're just going to kick over and fly away. We ended up with some mission that, we had to fly. We flew other stuff, but the important thing to the staff was getting their 8 or 10 cases of Dr. Pepper flown back out to them. So I think they were making up a mission so that we'd have to fly into Bahrain and bring stuff forward. So that the advice that the staff got from HM aviators embedded on their staff was very poor. I took one of those guys aside and mentioned, I said, if you want to have any sort of career when you come back to the helicopters, realize what you are sending up the chain, because you will not be welcome back in the den. You will be the first owlet kicked out of the nest, and the rest will be fed, and you'll be on the ground, broken. I think he figured it out. But the Commodore was he was not going to listen to me. He was not going to listen to the best of advice, and he kept on in this fairyland of presumption that he could do this and he could do that and it'll work for me. And it's like, you're not an aviator. Why are you in charge of an aviation asset? And that was always the sticking point with, we're an aviation thing, and why are surface warfare officers in charge of our mission? We had mop gear. These special rubber hood mask with a fan, forced air fan, and if the battery died, you died. Have you ever tried one of those?
I've not, but my old the Mother Mo, dies, he put it on. Yeah, he said it's miserable.
And it had this tearaway thing, and he said, well, you guys need to go out and train with those. And I said, Commodore, we have never flown off the deck with one of these things, and you can only see like this. And you can't see, you can't breathe. Now you're wearing plate armor. I said, this is something we're going to have a safety pilot and one guy try it. We're not going to suit up both people and go do it. And he kept saying, well, just turn two. It's like, if you want to risk losing an airplane because the guy's thrown up in his mask and he can't see, and now he's going to dump it going off the deck because you thought it was a good idea that we train with something we've never done before, it's not how we do stuff. So we suited up a few people, and they went out. And I think one of the guys ended up reaching off and tearing the mask off, and I'm going to fly the fucking airplane. That's enough of this foolishness. And that kind of died after a while. Okay, we're not going to suit up and all this stuff. And then the plan, because we thought Saddam would loose some weapons of mass destruction, nerve agents, blood agents, blister agents, whatever. Where do we go if we end up getting soiled? In the AOR, do we come back to the ship and poison everybody? What's the egress plan for, do we just land on the beach and hope we can wash up? Who's going to come rescue us? You going to bring us back to the ship and decontam us? We're going to contam the ship if we show up. Never could get an answer out of him. It's like, what do you want us to do if we go with all this gear and we're going to do these missions? It's a one-way mission. We're going to fly halfway back to Bahrain, cause an international incident, land on the beach of Kuwait, hopefully hit ourselves with 2-PAM chloride and survive it and wash up on the beach, and then what? The mine warfare play is over. No one's getting into that port. Why are we going into a known chemical environment and saying we're going to operate in a chemical environment? Because our crewmen in the back only had ponchos. They weren't going to wear any of the breathing gear. Great, so we can bring back a bunch of dead crewmen. So I had those discussions with the Commodore. Not being the sort of, yes, sir, we'll make it happen. It's like, Commodore, you need to know about the dangers, and we need to have a plan for this. And couldn't get through the guy. Couldn't get through to him. Was not important to him.
Has to be incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, that was a frustrating lack of critical thinking in the leadership.
Was this 91 or was this 03?
This is 03.
This is 03. So the threat was still expected the second time around, like the first time.
Oh, yeah. I'd already been to that barbecue.
Speaking of the barbecue, the first time, so the photo I keep referencing in the corner there, that is Tripoli, correct?
Yeah, that's Tripoli.
Were you on the ship when the Tripoli hit that mine?
You know the answer to this question.
I do.
Yes,
I do. Sorry, I have to ask it that way.
You feigned.
I did. Well, for the folks at
sort
home.
Of a wonderment on your face here. It's like, hi.
I don't know that I've heard the actual. I just remember you were on Tripoli.
Standing on the starboard flare of the starboard bow on an airplane doing a pre-flight.
Put us there. Yeah, I was going to say. So you were pre-flighting.
I had hangar deck integrity. I had the EWA watch.
Okay.
And there was a young airman with me. We were doing a pre-flight for another crew, and I was on top of the bird that was in the forward bone, right forward of the wheelhouse, the island, and I was just getting ready to step out over the tail, which was hanging out over the water, so I could look at the tail, and then boom, the airplane was hopping and a popping, and the ship rose up and wagged its nose left and right. The bow went left and right and settled back in the water, and then I felt the sine wave, like a garden hose, come back up from the stern as the whole ship did the inchworm, and it was a sharp, concussive bang, and then what's that chemical smell? Turned out to be paint. They'd hold a paint locker, and there was a gray paint slick on it's gray paint everywhere, and that was the atomized smell of oil-based navy gray paint that I was smelling. But it was this pop, and it was like you could feel the concussion, but the flare of the bow deflected it to a certain degree. But there were 4 or 5 Marines with Stinger missiles, shoulder launch missiles that were point defense, that got knocked down, and bruises and bumps, no broken bones. Because they were a little closer to it, they were underneath the flare of the bow, so they got more of a brunt than the people up on the flight deck. That's all that saved me, was the fact that the flare of the bow deflected that blast. Because you can see the picture, the hole's enormous.
Absolutely, and I don't believe it's secret at this point. Was it I'm trying to remember what kind of mine it was.
It was a mine. It was obviously a mine.
Yeah,
whether
absolutely.
It was moored or floating.
It did its job, unfortunately, which took a capital ship off the line for at least a period of time, as I imagine.
Yep, they patched it up, but it definitely made an impact on our readiness and our ability to continue the mission. It was interesting. The first people, 4:36, we hit the mine. I closed up the logbook and went to general quarters, and we're getting ready to do a fly-off because we got to save the airplanes. And the first people to line up on the hangar deck for the fly-off were the press. They'd had enough. Now they were ready to get off that ship.
Yeah. Wow. So I remember you mentioned HAR, so obviously tanking off a 130.
Yep.
Nothing, was that ever anything that was used operationally?
We didn't use it operationally.
Just a training thing.
Except once they sent 253s to Bermuda from Virginia. They practiced. I was the backup bird in case one of them couldn't take gas, and they topped them off, 150 miles out, and then we turned around and came back, and they made it to Bermuda. They were going out to be press aircraft for a conference. I think it involved Margaret Thatcher and some other folks that were meeting, and then the U.S. were going out, and that's how we got involved in doing HAR for real.
And you've done HAR day and night.
Day and night, unaided.
Insane.
We didn't have the aids.
Correct.
If they didn't exist, how did we fly at night before?
So all jokes aside, the tankers just lit up like a Christmas tree, I imagine.
No. There's green stripes on the
You
formation
did it just
column.
with the slime lights.
And then there's the little frosty light over the probe, which illuminates the drogue pantee as you get close enough. That cone works. And then your underslung spotlight, trainable spotlight with the, I'm going to use the term, coolie hat.
It's okay. It's a safe space.
Because it looks like the sort of hat that
that is the term in common usage. It's not offensive.
It's okay in the cockpit. That would give you a little bit extra, but you didn't want to train it on the aircraft because it would blind the crewman, and so that would be a dick move. So you flew on the slime lights until you got close enough, and then it lit up, and that's all you needed, because that also lit up the back of the wing, and the wing becomes your horizon.
Correct.
Look at the wing. Don't look anything from the lower lip down. Look at the wing and just use your peripheral vision to see as you're tucking in, just the 1,000-yard stare. And that wing becomes your world. Remain level with the wing and a little, step down, pick it up, push it in, left and up, and then it's easy to park on the wingtip for 20 minutes and take a bag of gas if you're going to. It takes about 25 minutes to take a good 13,000 pounds of fuel.
I have 3 dry plugs, and that's it.
Wow.
So it shows you, and I was the last generation of JOs that did that, which is kind of sad.
They're not hiring anymore?
Nope.
I
mean, it could be done theoretically. The gear is there. Occasionally, maintenance would
So they've taken all the probes off.
No, that's what I'm saying. Occasionally, maintenance would run the op check, but no, the generation of 04s to now 05s that did that as instructors are pretty much gone. There are some reserve guys, but again, no one is, when I say reserve guys, reservists. No one is current, qualified, getting a tanker from Cherry Point lined up. 14 did it a lot more because Silver Fox, one of their 04s, just loved HAR, and so that was that squadron that had a desire to do it. I think at 15 there was very much we'll never use it for real anyway. We need to focus on our real mission, which is towing. So there's a little bit of a balance between the two.
But you don't do the 105.
We don't. I never towed a 105.
Too much trouble. That's a big, complex system, and you're not using it
If
anymore?
you don't exercise it, you will never know how to use it, and when it matters.
It's probably, that was a good system. I was in the second iteration of 105. We took brand new 105s to Iraqi freedom, and they worked beautifully because they were brand new. They had a lot of goodness and luck locked up into them. The system finally worked, and now they're not using it.
You say finally worked. I take it prior to that there was a lot of teething pains with the 105?
Oh God, you'd go out and they'd work for a couple of days, and then they wouldn't work, and you'd hook up to the sled and they would die, and you just never knew. And then you had to pass gas to it so that you could hand it to the next guy, drop the tow ball, the other guy would come across your line, pick it up, and plug it in. In 2003, we dropped that sled. We handed that thing off 3 times during the day, and it ran all day, and we brought it back to the ship, and they got her maintenanced and ready to go for the next day, and those things worked for once. They friggin' worked.
Wow.
It was a bigger engine. It had a PT6 turbine on it.
Yes, it does. Yep.
So, and lots more fuel than what we had before. So
I don't know if this was ever a term for you. For us, very, very basics, peeling the onion, starting with that terminology. One of the things that was very much in vogue when I went through, hunt if you can, sweep when you must. And I get the feeling that was the opposite, because obviously with the Q-24 and a lot of reliant on, we got to peel the onion. We've got to, do we run a 103 through the water column? So then I send the Q through next. So now I can see what's in the water column to decide what I'm going to prosecute next.
And
I don't think that's the way it always was.
The various risk directives, depending on the bottom topography, as to whether you're going to drive your fish into a seamount. It depends on how many ripples are there, determines on whether you should hunt at all or what's hanging in the water volume. Yeah, it's all driven on intelligence. What do you think the enemy has laid before thee in a feast? A feast of possibilities. Are they bottom mines? Are they moored mines? Are they scoured in? How long did they go to sleep? The famous book Weapons That Wait. It self-sterilizes and then comes to life for a little while and only looks for a certain profile and may not be looking for you today.
Yeah. It truly is scary to think of how good some of these systems are and how hard they are to kill, to find and to kill.
Do you know what the finest offensive mine warfare weapon is? A telephone. A guy made a phone call and shut down the port of San Francisco.
Really?
Hey, there's mines in the Carquinez Straits, going into Suisun Bay. All stop. Why? Because the international insurance consortiums will not write risks for war. There's a mine in there? We're done. No ships in, no ships out. Telephone.
It's true.
Domino's Pizza, one call does it all.
Yes, very true.
It used to be delivered in 30 minutes, but now we don't do that because somebody crashed.
Can't put a time frame on that. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was the thing. 30 minutes or it's free. Well, I worked for Domino's before I came into the Navy, and I delivered a few free pizzas. Sorry, enjoy your pizza. Yeah, cool.
I am not speaking out of school when I said this because it was 100% in the open media when I looked later. But the quote that I always used to give my last year in HM 2021, there was someone killed in the world, several people in that calendar year, by a mine at sea. It's not sexy. It's not exciting. It was, again, all open source. The Houthis had laid some kind of a contact mine. It broke free of its chain and killed several, I think it was Yemeni fishermen or fishermen of some nationality.
Gulf of Aden.
Somewhere over there.
Yeah.
If I could Google it and search for it and find out more. But the point is, 2021, who thinks of that threat this, no one does. It's not something in the conscious. I would even wonder if it is in the conscious of mariners. And yet it's a real thing.
It is. Planners and tacticians know that. Let's look at the Shakespearean aspect of this. Poison is the woman's weapon, historically. Women have poisoned men as an assassin. They don't come in ninja pajamas with sharp knives. They come with poison. And you know, they drip it into your ear. They put it into your food. Okay. What does a smaller, less well-developed nation do? They buy mines from our friends the Norwegians. They buy mines from the Russians, who have lots of them left over. And all they need to do is figure out how to get them in the water somehow. And they don't have to be accurate about placing them. They just need to get them in the water, or they just need to pick up a phone and threaten that they put them in the water. Same thing. They're cheap, effective, they work, they cause uncertainty, they do exactly what they're supposed to do. They stop ships. It's denial, area denial. They're, bullets are not out of fashion, even though we have lasers. They're not going to supplant bullets. Mines are not going to be supplanted. They're still effective. Caveman, simplicity and effectiveness has its place.
Do you think AMCM will be supplanted? I know, like you mentioned, 04, it's been a hot minute since you've
I look at
been
the
in
whole,
those rooms,
you're going away in 2025 with bemusement.
Yeah.
And I look at the H-53 line in Stratford is doing the kilo for the Marines. There's no reason they can't put a tow boom on that, lighten up the gear, and continue the hunting with kilos.
Agreed.
That
Wholeheartedly. Yes.
And
frankly, and if you look at the buy that the Israelis just made, 20-something kilos.
Oh, okay. So that
we for that same amount of money, we could easily get that capability.
Yeah, you could, but you're going to have to make yourself less clunky, because the tail that follows HM unnecessarily is, if we're going to at least hunt for mines in a quick and trustworthy fashion, as opposed to wait for the ships to be brought over in the mighty servant put into the water and go do their slow plodding 30-day. You need AMCM. You need the light infantry.
Yes.
You need the light infantry showing up and getting a quick look.
And the reason I asked earlier about HAR, because number one, I wanted to hear some HAR stories. I'll try to circle back to that. But how did you guys in 91 get from Norfolk, was it Alameda and Corpus, from America to the AOR? Did you all take the boat? Because we were always told, no, you're never going to HAR. Maybe if you get C5 airlift, potentially you'll break down some birds, but more often than not, you're going to get on some kind of a big deck right across.
No, it was all airlift.
It was airlift. So the C5s came.
I was the loadout officer.
No way.
9 C5s, 13 141s. The 141s don't exist. I personally loaded every one of those airplanes.
As a 03?
As the 03 and as the cargo control officer. Yep.
That is incredible.
I did that.
Out of chambers.
Out of chambers. Established all that stuff in chocks, kept people away from it, because the problem was when they went over the Persian excursion, the Iranian quick look, they overloaded one of the 141s, and when it got to Mason Creek at the other end of chambers, when it was time to pull back on the yoke and rotate, it didn't. And they barely got off the runway in time because someone had continued loading stuff in one of the Connex boxes way forward, and the loadmaster didn't look as closely at this. Well, here's the weight that's listed. Almost somebody came in the dead of night through chains and filing cabinets, and that was the problem, was people would just keep throwing stuff on the pile. So we had to discipline that process to keep people from overloading it, because they almost lost an aircraft.
My gosh.
Lesson learned. So
yes.
I was real busy with that process.
That is an incredible, for them to cut that many airplanes just to that mission, to bring you guys over across the world.
It was important that we get there, and then it took about a week for us to reassemble FCF and then be able to do what we needed to do. But yet they moved us over. We were a national asset that they needed in place. So
was that in Bahrain that they flew you into?
No, we went to Bateen Air Base, constructed the aircraft in Bateen Air Base, and then flew them over to Abu Dhabi. Mina Zayed is the container port. They took down the lampposts, and we worked out of a container port right next to the seawall, where they could bring in the minesweepers, the Avenger, and the old wooden MSOs.
What was that? As an FCP, were you involved in that process of building those birds back up?
I was back at Abu Dhabi, and I wasn't bussed over to do a lot of that FCF. I wished I had been. And then when the birds showed up and we started flying and got to know our way around, flew all over the UAE. And
What was that like?
well, it was interesting going past Dubai because nothing was there. Had a golf course. We thought that was kind of neat. And
Wow.
Dubai and Abu Dhabi are all skyscrapers now.
Yes.
Unrecognizable.
Absolutely.
So it was a different world. Chased a lot of camels.
Didn't shoot any of them, did you?
Frightened a lot of fishermen. Flew up into the mountains. I got a number 2 engine freewheel spit out in an auto. And where it just didn't look like it was re-engaging when you came out at Ras Al Khaimah, RAC, and all British controllers up there. And we landed and we checked it out, and we'd been given the cultural sensitivity brief that if you're offered tea by the Arab hosting, accept it. 2 glasses, and the third one you put your hand over it. Don't accept it. It comes in these little enamel thimbles. We landed and came in. The guys came out in the uniform. They spoke pretty good English. Said, "Hey, we'd like to use your phone. We need to call back to Abu Dhabi." And said, "Hey, we experienced this. Can we do a penalty turn to da 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 da?" And of course, they brought out the tea, and we sat down and we had the tea, and we didn't cause an international incident, so it all went well. But they did a lot of flying around that area. One of the best parts of flying around UAE was you'd go over to Fujairah, which was the airhead for helos going out and hitting passing ships before they went into the Persian Gulf. And we found out very quickly that they have a duty-free shop in the airport. And there's all these military people sitting in the duty-free shop.
Yeah.
And there's guys in full gear and flight gear and their helmets still on, walking through, filling their helmet bags with liquor, myself included. And we'd take it back to our shore base because we had a beer mess. You could get 2 beer tickets a day, and plus we could go right up next to the parking lot to the Brit Club where they'd invited the officers in to drink, so we could go eat and drink there as much as we wanted. So it was the whole alcohol thing was kind of loose. So we'd go in and we'd grab liquor. Of course, we do flights up to Bahrain, and they had a liquor store in Bahrain. So buy liquor in Bahrain, bring it back into the camp. Nobody got in trouble.
Yeah.
Because we had a beer mess. So everyone behaved.
Very interesting. You mentioned Bahrain. Obviously, that's where I had the privilege of being for 3 6-month excursions, which I genuinely enjoyed.
Bahrain living is good living.
What do you remember different from your first time there? And then obviously the squadron was there the second time.
It was tiny.
In 03. Okay.
NSA Bahrain was just a PSD. They kept building the base. It was just a tiny little backwater thing, like an embassy. It's gotten huge since then.
Yes.
It was unrecognizable when I went back.
So I was told it was the old British, like the NSA one, the main base there used to be the British presence. I guess at some point they have a little back lot now where their RFA, their fleet auxiliary ships pull in. Yep. They have barracks and their own little chow hall and all that. But okay, I didn't know if you had any.
No
huge.
Insight. It was just a tiny little blister. When I went back, it was totally unrecognizable.
Okay.
So it is expanded greatly.
I've often joked because we have a lot of P8 guys in the squadron now, and they will go down to, what's the base? Isa in the southern part of Bahrain. Yep. And so in the P8 world, going to Bahrain is the worst. In the helicopter world, it is the best.
Because the hotels are not at Sheikh Isa, they're not as good as they are.
There are no hotels. They live in connexes, and they go to the mess.
And they're P8 guys.
They're P8 guys, yes.
Fuck them. Air conditioning, and they don't have to wear flight gear.
I know.
Whiners.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. It's a different world, but yeah, they get like $2 a day or whatever, some small amount in per diem, whereas, of course, we are living it up $122 a day for 6 months times 3 deployments.
It was $80.50 when I was there.
In 03.
$80.50 a day, yeah.
That's still fantastic.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, but the cost of living is high. It's not, you could spend $30, $40 on a meal without trying.
Yep.
More if you bought alcohol to go with that meal. So
yeah.
I bought Megan's, engagement ring and all that stuff in the souk. That was my, I don't know, and I don't know if, obviously, you joined the military prior to 9/11. You were in the military on 9/11. I was not. I was a little kid. But I just definitively remember being interested in the military before 9/11 and absolutely committed after. And I wanted to go to that part of the world. I don't know why. Probably just in a strange tangential way. It's the defining event of my generation, probably.
I put on a uniform first in 1979. And this was just after the Iranian hostages, the 444 days, and there was a great upswell of patriotism. And Reagan had come into office just after that. They let him go at that point, but that was the the people were re-looking post-Vietnam at our military and patriotism, and there was kind of a groundswell of patriotic fervor. And 20 years later, 9/11, that brought a lot of people into
Back.
it.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that those were Navy RHs.
Yeah, they came and they took 2 or 3 of those airplanes from HM-14 and said, shut up, we're taking your airplanes, and they flew them off. It was a learning curve for joint operations. They wanted everybody to have a piece of this, and we just didn't work well together. We didn't have a soft presence the way we do now. We've rectified that, but it takes a good 20 years to develop a robust, soft presence and operators and the ability to operate with others. So that was a learning curve.
Speaking of the Air Force and joint operations, I don't remember who it was. I have the book, literally a paperback book I bought on my last deployment that went into that, and specifically some of the Navy parts of the mission. And it was funny as a 53 guy reading that. Yeah, we had these aircraft stuffed away on an aircraft carrier for a long period of time.
And they kept them below deck.
Below deck, so they wouldn't show up on the satellites. And then, imagine that. We pulled them out on the flight deck and expect them to do this very complex mission, and they broke.
Of course they
broke. What a
broke.
surprise. Yeah, exactly.
One of them got a BIM light going into the dust storm and had to turn around. Okay, you don't continue with a BIM light. It was a poorly planned from the beginning, and it was under Carter's watch. It was a foreign policy disaster because they didn't listen to the guys that knew how to do it and let the military guys put it together. No. We need, before we even had this term, diversity and inclusion. We need to include everybody. We need diversity. We don't really have joint capability. Who are the guys who could do this organically? They should have left that alone.
But what was born out of that? 2011, literally the phrase I like to quote, killing bin Laden, U.S. Army Special Operations Command in general, that wouldn't have existed had it not been for those fuck-ups at Desert. Well, I truly believe those lessons were learned.
It was born out of that.
Yeah.
We needed that capability. We needed to reconstitute what we disbanded after the Vietnam War.
Exactly.
And we got smart. And now all this low-intensity conflict that we have absolutely cries out for the soft mission. Got to have it.
But we cannot forget those peer or near-peer adversaries like China, like Russia, that are...
Don't get involved in a land war in Asia. It's not going to go well.
Yeah.
You're going to have to let the Asians be Asians. We don't live there, but at the same time, we don't need to set a table for them on the West Coast.
Yes.
And we need to maintain our blue water Mahanian projection of power.
Yes.
And our involvement. And we did the same thing with Russia.
Peace through strength. We can't guarantee peace if we don't have the biggest damn stick.
You have to be involved, you have to be engaged, and you have to continue to be lethal. It's not worth their while to lose one of their capital ships. It's not worth our while, but we're not going to go head-to-head on a land war. The Chinese, the PLA, is there to take Taiwan, and they're going to. After the Olympics are over, they're going to take Taiwan. I thought they would take it after the last Olympics. They're going to take it, and we're not going to risk a capital ship and I'm showing my age, in the Straits of Formosa, the Straits of Taiwan. We're not.
Can't say Formosa anymore. Yeah.
Why can't we?
I
It's
don't,
on all
because the Chinese don't like
the British
it.
Admiralty charts that I sailed the Far East were Straits of Formosa.
Yep. You're going to find no disagreement from me. Yeah. They are good at playing the long game, and we are not. And I think by acknowledging that, hopefully we will become better at it. But I'm all for, friendship among nations, but it has to be friendship. It can't be being held hostage by those other countries. And I feel like sometimes we allow ourselves to be.
We wax and wane on our abilities to project power.
Yeah.
Because we change presidents more frequently. Putin's been in office since '99. He's their czar. But that's what they have there. We have to be, we have to deal with that. What else?
I don't know. Let's go back to HM.
We'll go back to that's how this whole thing was.
It is how this whole thing
was on
started.
HM.
7 flying tours back to back, right? Roughly speaking.
Yep.
And I tried to go down the list, the numbers there. I remember at one point you were at
a break at War College in Newport.
War College and then Panama City, right?
Oh yeah, and in Panama City I consider a squadron tour because I was flying. We had 2 RHs and the prototype MH, which they called Buffy, Big Ugly Fucking Echo, and both of the RHs were set up differently. So your scan was different, and one of them had a laser gyro instead of an ASN-50 in the Doppler well. And then we had a single-engine UH-1 Echo with a stab bar.
Which you have a good story about that Huey too, as I recall.
Yeah, it was fun flying it.
Yeah.
It was great.
So, but all that to say, I think we would not have a retention problem right now on the pilot side, if people could be a pilot for as long as you were. And I don't know if that's just a product of that time in space and military aviation. I think it might be. But what was that like? I mean, I don't know. You have nothing to compare it to.
I came in to fly.
Of course.
I was interested in flying, and the TAR program, now FTS, offered the opportunity to stay relevant, was to stay in the squadron. To stay operational meant you would get promoted. You'd grab the OIC ticket, and that would be your ticket to 05. And then if you're in the squadrons and you're on the HM world, there was a 1 in 3 rotation for skippers, and I hit that timing quite well. Then I got selected for command, so I went back to the flying thing. So.
Yep. Was it, and this is something that I've heard some people that have come up since then talk about, it's a good thing to see what it's like to be on a staff or see things outside of HM. I have only seen my limited perspective. To me, if I'm an aviator and a leader in aviation, what more do I need to see? I'm not going to go on to become an admiral. Even as a skipper, yes, you have to understand how to respond and react and be part of the bigger Navy and naval aviation. But I don't know, and at least in my limited perspective, to be good at it, you need to keep doing it.
Flying is 10% of your fit rep. After that, they don't care. You already know how to fly. We're going to grow people into senior staff, acquisitions, training, whatever. That's really where they want to take people, because they can't bring them in horizontally. They have to grow them.
Good point.
So they will matriculate regardless of competency or desire into those senior positions. And I saw some folks from the HM world make 06 that weren't on the command track. They still made 06. I wasn't sure how that was possible, and ended up running these big programs and doing this and that. And all I'd ever seen them do when they moved from one program to another as a divo was come in and dismantle all the good ideas that the other guy had done before him. And that was their, let's just reinvent the wheel. And sometimes the wheel was oblong and it didn't roll smoothly, and no one noticed. And yet those guys made 06 and ran significant programs.
Why do you think people have that desire to reinvent the wheel? Just to put their mark on it?
It's bureaucratic foolishness. You can afford to do that in a bureaucracy. If you were employed on the outside, you'd be let go.
You'd be gone in a second.
It would be noticed. It would be noticed.
How many hours ballpark in the 53 total?
I'm going to say my military time was about 3,500 hours, and subtract 230 in the training command, 300 in the King Air, and so about 3,000 hours, 3,200 hours.
Yeah, that's incredible.
53 RH and MH.
Do you miss it?
I like flying the 53, but I told you when I was in HM12, I learned it through brute force. I read the NATOPS for that 5 months, 6 months I was in there. I read that 40 times, cover to cover, and totally shredded it in my mind and racked and stacked emergencies. And I was ready when I got in that thing. I knew what it was going to do. And nobody ever questioned my ability to fly or my knowledge of the airplane. And I did a lot of FCF. And I noticed that guys would do FCF and they'd bring it into tolerance and quit. And it's like, no, we're going to sit here and pick this aircraft. And I've told you this story before. We're going to pick this up, I think it was either 18 or 22 times, pick up into a hover to get the collective bias fucking perfect. Because if you get it fucking perfect, all three matched across the top, and I don't care what the crewmen say, if you need to take a leak, we'll land, take a leak outside, you get back in and give me a couple more clicks. If you get it fucking perfect, it stays perfect for that 100 hours till it's ready for phase. And I would take aircraft up and it would be like, we're not going to finish until this is tuned. And that a lot of that knowledge I got from the aircraft, besides reading ahead of time, was obtained on FCF. And there was a sense of fulfillment in mastering that aircraft. You couldn't catch me on a limitation or something that wasn't working, or something that should, or something in the GAI, or what you should look for on pre-flight, or what will break. And you couldn't catch me on that. I had all the subtleties, and that was important to me, to be the aviator that knew everything. Because if you knew everything, you knew what you were going to do next when something went wrong. So there was never any moment of doubt or indecision. If something did go wrong, I knew what to do. And I needed that confidence to feel that I wasn't an imposter in the cockpit. I wanted to feel like I was not hanging on to the vertical fin as the airplane raced away from me. I'm going to make this thing do my job. I
find that interesting that you made the point about the air crewman that has to take a leak. I found it the other way around, that our FCF crew chiefs especially were, and I'm going to use the example of bias poles because you brought it up, they were the ones that were actually making the adjustment back there. We would fly the bias pole, obviously, up front. I found they were the ones that were more exacting because they knew when that aircraft went out there, someone else would ask, hey, who was the crew chief when this thing FCF'd, when those motors were all screwed up?
Yeah.
And the other way around, I remember having co-pilots, or when I was the co-pilot going through the FCF syllabus, aircraft commanders that were, it's close enough, it's good enough, this engine's about to come off, or always, in my mind, a poor excuse as to why we're not going to get this right. And same thing, when you'd go out flying, I wonder who, you could go back. It wasn't that hard to look at the book. I'm not claiming I'm ever as good as some of the best, but I would not put my signature in that book unless I knew those steps were right and I knew they were done properly. I don't care what anyone else says because I know other people are going to judge me, and frankly, I'm going to judge them too, and that's the way it should be, I think.
I went into as an H-2P in the RH-53D into maintenance control and found that the daily, which can last up to 72 hours until the first flight of the day, was expired by 30 minutes. I said, daily's expired. Senior chief was like, okay, we're going to redo it. You're going to have to. And I walked away. I was an H-2P. Nobody ever jacked me up for, it was only 30 minutes. You could have said, no, I came here to read the book, and it was, you guys behind the desk presented me this book, and you should have known, and you could have known, and when I showed up, it was 30 minutes stale. Redo it. They did. That's the first thing you check is that little slip there. And then you dive through. Well, I guess you read everything electronically. You're not reading paper maths.
In the T6 it is. In the 53 it was all electronic.
It's all
and in the training command, I think it's just too much of an administrative burden. In the fleet, absolutely all
electronic. Well, it was all paper when we had it in the VIDS math boards with everything tucked into the board, and you'd flip up to, that was before we had Nalcomas.
Yes.
Nalcomas was a DOS-based system when we first got it, and the world had moved to Windows, and so it was very difficult to put in the yellow sheet. It was user hostile, and the GUI, the graphical user interface, is a lot better. The GUI is better now, but it was all paper when I first come in. You'd get 2 volumes like this, and you'd flip through all the green, and you look for the pink one, and see that. How many flights did it get? And that's how you looked for the trends.
It is an art to reading the book. It absolutely is. And I remember a story that I don't remember the root of it, but you once told about someone literally stripping maps out of the book. And my brain, because again, so electronic, I thought, well, no, it'd be in there electronically. There's a way to go back and trace. But no, if it's just a paper book, you could physically strip maths out, and no one might ever know.
Well, they'd be on the VIDS math board. There'd be a record, but it took a while to chase it down.
But you have to learn how to do that. You have to learn how to look for it.
You went to school to learn how to arrange a VIDS math board, visual ID system, maintenance action form, how to put those 7-part carbon, press hard, buff to ops. You had to know. Buff. Why can't we just call it yellow? No, that's canary. Buff is the off-orange color that comes after the other one. 7 parts. Press hard.
One thing that I appreciated when you were talking about, again, it's almost funny how some of these relationships are inverse from what you described and from what I've experienced, because it's just different generations, I guess, of maintainers. I loved the chiefs, senior chiefs or master chiefs. Master Chief Farrar was the last master chief, maintenance master chief officer at MMCPO, let me get it with some respect on there, when I left HM15. And I remember he had the attitude of, it is not, what did he say? It's my job as the maintenance master chief to prove to you that this bird is good to go. If you have questions, come ask them. We will talk about them. He always had a great, neutral tone, not accusatory, not hostile, not defensive. If something's not right, I need to hear about it. We'll fix it and we'll move on. And yet there were other people, and unfortunately, at times I experienced this out on det, that you would call something that was right. Oh, really? You care about that, sir? Or it is that attitude of, it's good enough. It'll be. And I always thought, how is the mishap investigation going to read? Oh yeah, and then the 2P or the hack accepted that, and that Swiss cheese hole, we removed that layer, and that's why a mishap happened.
When I was there, our air crewmen were the maintainers.
Yes, they were. Such a good model.
I just wondered how that changed things. It's because now you've got, how many fucking AWs do you have hanging around NATOPs? And what do those guys do until do they make them do plane captain so they're helping the line division? Or do they just show up?
No, they do.
They have a cameo role, and then off they go and they wait for their next call. I mean, those guys aren't turning wrenches, but the guys turning wrenches could surely use the help. When you had the air crewmen flying who knew how to fix them, you had a higher level of competency and pride on the airplane when you went someplace with it. And plus the work was, we're going to have to fix this, or I know what's going on. You could translate. It just worked better. And then the Navy decided everyone's going to be an AW. And they forgot that 780, 900, close to 900 people that you have in an HM squadron. I know a lot of them are over at AIMD. You never meet them. 74 Charlie for the fish. They're not actually, they're on the books, but you don't see them. They're no-show union jobs. Who knows what they do over at AIMD? Some 70 people over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got all these people, and now they're not going to turn wrenches. They said, well, we'll make them plane captains. It's going to take a while for you to make them plane captains. They're not really maintainers. So just how involved in the maintenance world are they? Because they actually belong to ops. And that's where the fit reps are written for those guys. And how many AWs do you have, air crewmen?
I couldn't give you a number, but a lot.
150?
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. They're underutilized.
Absolutely. And that was the other sad part, was only if, this is something that always surprised me, especially coming up through the FCF syllabus, not all the senior people were FCF crew chiefs.
Right.
Plenty of them, I don't want to do that. I don't want to bother with that. I don't want to have to do that on my weekend. And that irritated the fire out of me. And if I ever saw that from a co-pilot, we had several that would joke about, I want my weekends. I want to be an FCP. Fuck you.
Fuck you. You're
not even with
FCP.
respect. I don't even respectfully disagree. I disrespectfully disagree. Oh, so the rest of us can come in and be away from our families because you don't want to
fly those guys less.
I tried.
Yeah, you'll fly less. Yeah.
I did everything I could in. Like we're all on the same team, and so the same thing from the air crew side, where senior folks that had been FCF crew chiefs in the past at prior squadrons, and only 3 squadrons to go between anyway, but and then the wing and the weapons school at the wing. But anyway, there's no interest in contributing. That was always, no one ever taught me that. It just always seemed like the logical thing to do, and I by no means am anything special, but I don't want to yell at the chief behind the desk or the maintainer. I want them to be on my team and I'm on their team. And it's us versus the problem together.
Maintenance was monolithic. Ops thought it was in charge. I always made the OPSO and the maintenance officer talk before they came up to brief me, so they didn't come into my office and argue.
Really?
Yeah. Show a united front. Don't ask something in maintenance that, as an OPSO, that is unrealistic. Maintenance don't give the ops guys short shrift. Plan your stuff and then let the skipper know, is this a physical impossibility logistically with supply to actually get these birds in the air? Let's and then I can engage with the wing and and move this forward. Let's not keep elbowing each other, when nobody's looking. And just, fuck it. That's not helpful.
How long were you? It was EXO into skipper, obviously. So you fleet up at
2.5 years.
2.5 years. Yeah. What years were those?
I think I showed up there in 2002.
So you took the reason I'm doing the math.
No, I showed up there in 2000. I became CO in 2003. Summer 2001. I showed up there in 2001 as PXO. And then PXO for, 3-4 months. Then, continued on.
The reason I asked the question, you took the squadron to war as...
I did.
EXO into CO or as CO?
CO.
As CO.
Yeah.
What was that like? That's a broad question.
The Commodore came up to me at the change of command and said, Ian, you're going over to Bahrain. I said, well, yes, sir. I'd like to, a month or so to get stuff. Take it, Ian. You're going over to Monday. This is Friday's change of command. Monday, you're getting on a plane and you're going over. Understand. So they've been doing all this planning in secret and decided what they were going to do. Cheery eye. Let's go do it. So for my first 5 months, I was not running the squadron at home. My XO was, and off I went. So it was kind of a surprise.
Were you all the first? I'm trying to think back.
Was
there a 53 presence in Bahrain?
Yeah, there was already a debt.
Okay, so you were there plussing up the debt, bringing birds over, bringing people over.
Yep, we plussed it up, started training, and then we ended up forward deployed on the Ponce.
Okay, I was on my 45 days of ship time was the Puller, the replacement to the Ponce. That's really cool.
Yep, and the Gunston Hall had all the Dolphin tanks, so they were the support for the marine mammal system. Mammal,
yes.
And spent a lot of time running restaurant-grade sushi out to them. I thought we were out here to sweep for mines, but apparently we're here to fly in sushi. We were dual-hatted. We had CTF 58, 55, whatever it was. We had the logistics thing. We have to do mail hits, but we also had to do the other side. It's like, I know you're on the crack. You really like the mail hits, and the Gunston Hall is no different, but what was the Gunston Hall going to do if 53s weren't there? Were the Dolphins going to starve? And it really impacted our readiness. once again, we're getting back to the staff who was in charge of the Gunston Hall and the Marine Mammal Program, decide what's more important. But because you've got a really good asset here that can do really great things, why can't they, now that they own the entire ship, why can't they feed these, I understand they're highly evolved mammals. They think and they feel, and maybe they even do math. But you have freezers. You should be able to take the food and keep them happy.
The sailors aren't eating that well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I could never understand that. It was never explained to me.
But it did really detract from your ability to do the primary mission set.
Yeah. Suddenly we're flying all this stuff to the Gunston Hall. It's like, who planned this out? It could have been planned better.
Did that last through the war?
Or is the Gunston through the full thing?
Yeah. My gosh!
Yeah.
Wow.
And at one point, one of the dolphins went missing.
I shouldn't laugh.
He went for a swim. He went for a swim one morning, and then suddenly there were milk cartons showing up. Have you seen me with Flipper? And he came back like 2.5 months later. We think he found a little bit of fluff in somewhere in the southern Gulf.
Oh my!
And went off and had a good time, and then he found his way back to the ship.
Typical Navy problem.
And showed up. It's time to collect his paycheck. And I didn't really desert. I really meant to come back the whole time.
I don't know if it's true. A story I heard recently was there was a marine mammal program thing going off, I think San Diego, and the dolphin showed up in Hawaii.
I guess that's possible.
It's a good story, whether it's true or not. But the point is, yeah, it's an animal. I mean, we're animals too, I suppose. That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, it's not a piece of gear. It's not a piece of equipment that.
Yeah, that program has been around since the '60s, when it was very hush hush. Now it's out in the open. I think it still exists. I'll tell you some other stuff about it after we sign off after a commercial break.
Okay, so helicopter questions.
Helicopters.
Don't
know anything about them.
I heard a rumor that in, I don't know if it was 91 or 03 or both, you guys were escorted by Cobras. Is that true?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. In 91, we had a reserve Cobra unit from Atlanta. All American Airlines pilots came over on the Tripoli and then cross-decked to the New Orleans. They were our sensor outer ring. They were there to sense the radar aerial warning. They had the raw gear, and they get lighted up by the Iraqis on the beach who were trying to target us with missiles. So we'd know just how close to the beach we could get, and then back off. So while we were out towing, they were out skipping around, sniffing at 25 feet. We're towing at, somewhat over 25 feet, and
Sure.
They're out there clipping around, keeping an eye on things, make sure a high-speed boat doesn't come out with a couple of guys with stolen stingers or a bazooka.
I have a story about that. Not in a wartime environment, but okay. Wow, so that was a thing?
That was a thing.
Not in 03, though?
Not in 03, and I mentioned that while I was on the USS Cowpens at the planning thing. I said, you're going to send us in unopposed. We're going in naked. They said, now, I was here for Desert Storm, and we had a Cobra escort that came in. Oh, no, the P-3 flew overhead, and we see everything on the beach, and we know you guys would be okay. I said, this is what we did. If there's somebody on the shore side in that port with a shoulder-launched missile, we don't have anybody to come in and neutralize. And still, this is the planning that I wouldn't have done, but I made my best attempt to get an escort.
Sure.
I think we had British Lynx up above given some ISR, and they might have had missiles, but I don't think they were with us. They were virtually present and actually absent.
Gotcha.
Yep, that's the thing.
Okay, that makes sense. It makes the way you described it, in my mind, it's you guys towing in the fields and there's a Cobra right alongside you. The way you describe the employment is significantly more
We had a Marine Corps
sensical.
We had a Marine Corps helicopter deck control guy, the handler, who was more, when we went over to the New Orleans, he was more concerned with how we behaved in the men's room, not the men's room, in the wardroom and in the ready room than how we were going to fly. And when we went over to the New Orleans, we ended up calling it the no boat, because you can't do this and you can't do that, you can't do this and you can't do that. And so we ended up calling him Major Manners, because there was all this. We're going to sit over here at our aviator table, and we're not going to sit with you, Major. Okay, that was kind of comical. And they took Major Manners out to fly with the Marines, and he over-torqued one of their Hueys right there on the deck. Good one. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Knucklehead.
So he was an aviator, just in a non-flying billet.
Doing his handler tour.
Any other good memories from that time?
From the
just
New
good
Orleans
flights?
boat? No. And one of our guys landed his 53 at night. He took off on the Tripoli. He had to land in the berth ahead on the New Orleans because we were cross-decking. Rainy, ORM shouldn't have forced us to cross-deck, and he ended up sliding into one of the antennas and hit it with his rotor blades, and then landed. And then the air boss came out and was furious at him. And to his credit, he said, "Boss, I think we need to talk about this another time. We need to, assemble the collector." He was like the Tasmanian devil. Boss, this isn't the time to be going through this, and understand your displeasure. But we're lucky to be alive. We need to assess the aircraft and the missions that are going in the morning. But they set him up for it. They you left in port in a berth on a ship during the day, worked all day, lily pad, and came back and they said, "Oh, and land on this ship in the dark, in the rain. We'll turn on the lights, wires. It's a port that we're not familiar with, and why don't you just spend the night on the ship? Make more sense." So we brought it on ourselves.
I'm guessing at least all 7 main rotor blades, main gearbox. I don't even know what you would change, but
yes,
that's a bad day.
It changed all of it.
God bless. On the ship.
Sudden stoppage, yeah.
FCF on the ship.
Oh yeah, FCF. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pick up into a hover close aboard, do your thing. Something goes wrong, you go in the drink.
Yeah, and hopefully they can get a boat in the water, or wow, that sucks.
FCF at sea is abbreviated. There is no slide for life over the no.
No, there's not. Yes, the only FCF I ever saw was off Puller. We had a crew that was out. I actually have the video from Scan Eagle. I will show you if you ever want to see. You can see the motor pop in the Scan. The Scan Eagle was on the proper side, filming them. Number 3 engine goes bang. You see them sink down toward the water. You see the cable slap the water as they cut it, and then transition up and away. You see them dumping fuel as they came back in. We were in the wardroom, and the Scan Eagle guy runs in and was like, "Hey man, I think one of your helicopters is streaming something." And we had one bird out towing, and was like, "Okay, yeah, it was streaming the gear." He goes, "No, like something's coming out of the helicopter." And we were like, "Streaming fuel?" Everyone runs up. They set flight quarters. These guys come in and land it, dual engine. I have a great photo, actually, because I wasn't on watch, of the aircraft coming in. Normally you would see the heat plumes with the water in the background of, off number 1, off number 2, off number 3.
Yep.
And it's very clear it's dead on the one side because the engine's not operating. And X brought the bird back, did a great landing. And then it was like, now what do we do? Because we were too far away from Bahrain. It was a smarter decision to come back to the boat. But from a logistical perspective, now we have to change the engine on the boat, which I have glorious photos of. I stayed up late that night with the maintainers and learned a lot, and got some really cool photos in the hangar bay of them doing all that hard work. Then the next day, our senior 04 had to FCF, and at one point he took his helmet off and threw it down the back of the aircraft. That's how pissed he was, trying to get bias in on the deck. No, I take that back. It wasn't even bias in. It was just getting the head online or something. But yes, that one bias pull was a one pull, see you later in Bahrain type departure.
Yep. Clear for forward flight.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Or were we? I don't know. We're light. We're going home. It was an adventure. As a mere
We had
2P.
We had an aircraft get a chip light on a carrier hit in the Cherry Point operating area, and they rowed the boat to the Med. Guys came back a month and a half later. They had to find another platform so they could get on a returning amphib, come into Little Creek and bring the aircraft back, and they don't even have a toothbrush. Lived in the same flight suit for a month and a half.
Because there was no other way to get back.
No other way to get back.
You all would take the aircraft literally across the United States, right? Alameda to Norfolk or vice versa. Yeah, that's insane. That's something that I never had the opportunity to do.
Well, everybody's in Norfolk, so
yeah,
you don't have to go do an op. We did exercises in the 90s in Corpus Christi all the time because HM-15 in Corpus Christi had the training wheels on. They weren't letting them do certain things because they had some big maintenance kerfuffle. So we would go down and stand in for them and then come back. So we did a lot of flights from Norfolk down to Corpus Christi. Flight of 3 VFR, 500 feet the whole way.
Hot gas anywhere, or you'd stop, shut down?
No, we'd go to military fields and get gas. We didn't hot gas. We went I delivered an aircraft from Sikorsky, and we left Norfolk the next day, and we went into Camp Lejeune, and they were going to be closing the fuel pits. We just dropped in out of the sky, went into the hot pits, hooked us up, and we taxied out, and off we went. And as soon as we broke the deck, they closed the airfield. We were able to hot pit and get finished. They were doing a change of command or something like that. It was like,
quiet hours.
Off we go to Jacksonville.
Yeah.
So sometimes that works out. I liked hot pitting. We used to hot pit at Oceana a lot.
Oceana. They let you mix it up with the jets.
Oh, yeah. There's a low level coming in over Lynnhaven to get in and out of there.
Yeah, we never did it. We were always told, stay away. It's their jet base. They don't come and bother us at Chambers, and we don't bother them at Oceana, which is kind of sad.
Yep.
Did you ever land at Pendleton, Camp Pendleton on the beach there by Oceana, the little Army Guard base?
Camp Pendleton?
Yep, not the Pendleton on the West Coast. Camp Pendleton on the East Coast.
No, we would go into Fort Story and land where the LCACs are. We'd stream off the beach there. Used to stream the 105s off the beach.
That's cool.
Yeah. beach
Even though
hops.
you're underneath the airspace for international?
Yeah, you just work it out with them.
A couple hundred feet and below.
If you're at 75 feet, they don't give a shit. And you could fly down the beach. We called it the tugboat transition. You could fly down the beach past Little Creek, and you could call Norfolk Approach and say, I'd like to do the tugboat transition, and they'd know what you want to get. 500 below down the beach. Yeah, sure. Otherwise, it was point X-ray, finish off your single points, and head on out to the operating area.
Any good emergencies? I mean, it sounds like probably a bunch, but the most I ever did was lost a motor and then had smoke coming from an AFCS panel. I think those were the two biggies.
Yeah, I had smoke and fumes. I had smoke and fumes here and there. We selectively turned things off. I had U1 hydraulics, U2 hydraulics, where we'd have to stop towing, get the gear back. Can't remember losing a Q14, Q24. Recovered early. Sometimes had a bird's nest. Come back and lay the thing down on the deck and then land. If it's stuck with the ramp down.
So you would external the Q.
You could external and lay it down without screwing it up.
Oh, so real quick, it was on the actual. It was on the ramp itself.
It's in the No,
it wasn't hanging below the aircraft.
No, it was 100 feet below.
It was. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Yeah,
okay, so you were externally.
And you'd lay it down and then not drag it. I mean, there's no reason to damage it. It doesn't have to be damaged. And you can lay it down. It's like, okay, got a scratch in it. Big deal. At least you brought it back.
We had some that was a very 14 thing to do for us. It was, hey, mark it, we'll have EOD come back and dive on it and get it later. I'd rather you do that than external it and damage it in the process, because we had 14 damage a Q when I was there, trying to bring it at the heliport and slam it into the runway.
If a guy can't hover with the null zone in the appropriate point, so he doesn't twist that cable up 3 times, which after 3 times you've unwound it, then why are you flying a Q-24? You should be able to hover and land and put that at a crewman's feet if you know what you're doing. I know. I can do it because I've done it. I could lay a mop between 2 parked cars and not scratch them looking at the mirror.
Good Lord. I don't know that I could do that.
They con me in. Once you get it down, you can see it doing this, and then you can just kind of work it back and lay it right down next to the other mops in line. You leave it out like this. That's not professional. Get it right.
I don't think I ever got it right. I got the mop back to the general area that it staged from.
But I put it right down where I wanted it to be.
Awesome.
I could do it. But had a number 2 engine fire. Turned away, was going through some rainstorms, going out to a boat hit, LPH, I think, for DLQ. So it was too far away from the beach. So the bingo became the deck. And I called them and said, got a number 2 engine indication of a fire, going to have to land. And they said, we'll put you in Port Delta. I said, I've got a number 2 engine fire indication. I'm declaring an emergency. I'm going to land. We'll put you in Port Delta, in the overhead delta. I'm going to land on your deck, open your deck. I've got an engine issue. And I think we turned away and we got, the spurious indication. And then we ended up going through some rain and they were vectoring us. And we came in. By the time we got there, they got their heads out of their ass and we came straight in and landed. But
it was just a bad indication.
It was a bad indication made worse by the people in HDC.
Yeah.
Thinking that they'd put me in Port Delta. No, I'm going to land right fucking now. And if you don't let me land, I'm going to come in and land cross deck and shut it down. It's an emergency, And when does this thing pull into Little Creek? Because Tuesdays aren't good for me. Would you look at the time? So
we had one of our aircraft commanders on a night boat hit on not the Puller, but whatever the one that came after it. So it's Alaska class tanker with a flight deck in the middle, and he had just picked up at night over the deck. And I don't remember if it was smoke or fumes or something, but there was something very serious, and he was about to transition, and the crewman called it, and he slid back. And of course, the guys on the deck are waving him off. They think they don't know what's going on. He doesn't have the moment to tell them, and just came right back over and planted it. Spent the night on the ship. The next day, sent a rescue bird out with maintainers and did the whole dance. But when he told the story, I have always told it repeatedly to try to get folks to realize, you are in control of your destiny. Hey, do not let a voice on the radio talk you into a position of extremis. You have to be in charge.
It's like the air boss on the George Washington, on the carrier. Didn't want to give me fuel. Boss, I need fuel. How much does that thing take? That's how he said it on the radio. It's like, well, I've just flown out George Bush Sr. and his entourage. I'd like to get some gas so I can get out of the Cherry Point operating area and get back home. And I thought he thought he was going to buffalo the young lieutenant. It's like, no, I'm the XO of the squadron. I didn't tell him that. So I know you're a captain, I'm a commander, but I'll be happy to get out on the flight deck and come up and talk to your boss about what we're not going to do, and I need this gas. You don't turn down gas. And you don't deny gas when you ask for it. So I sat there and we took 21.5 and took our sweet-ass time, and then off we went.
Okay, so
don't fuck with me.
Let's get back to the part where you flew the former president at the time. Yeah, what the heck was that all about?
He was a friend of the battle group commander that was out there on the carrier, and he invited him out. And so he came with all his people. He sat in the cockpit and got to meet him and shake his hand. And
soundproofing in the bird and everything?
Yeah, they sent a Malinois, a Belgian Malinois, bomb-sniffing dog to check everything out, and then they brought him on board with 10 or 12 people with him. And
Wait, was the bird turning when the dog walked?
Yeah.
Oh my, poor dog.
Very disciplined dog.
Just flew him out and then someone else brought him back?
I went out 2 days later and brought it back.
Wow, so
I
2
got to
days
do
on the boat.
both flight. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
spinning back up as well, or just one bird?
Oh, yeah, we had a couple spinning backups and made it happen.
That's really, really cool. I don't know. Maybe it was those photos. I've seen photos of him flying in a 53. That might have been it.
Might have been it?
Yeah.
He's flown a bunch, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, man was a naval aviator, like a really American hero. So.
Yep. It was interesting meeting him. He was very much an aristocrat. We talked, and he wanted to know why the HSI needles were spinning around. I said, well, sir, we're too low to get a lock on the carrier, so, but we're going to get there. It's maybe a 45-minute flight out there. He was from a different generation. He's from the last century. Think about that.
Truly. Ian, it is 4:01 p.m.
It's 4 o'clock. We need to pinch this off.
I think we should pinch this off. Thank you again. I'll come with more questions and more, because I actually do have some more things to ask you.
But we'll do more of this. Perhaps this will outlive me, and someone will be listening to this a long, long time.
That's the goal. All jokes aside, some of the HM stories.
Oral history.
I have never heard of someone towing underneath a crane. That's pretty cool.
Underneath a container crane.
Sorry.
It can be done.
With a Mark 105.
Yeah.
I will tell this story to other people in the HM community, and they will not believe me. I promise you that.
They don't have to believe me. They can go fuck themselves. They can go forth and multiply.
Photos or it didn't happen. Well, at least I now have the story, so I know what happened.
We didn't have smartphones, so we didn't document everything. There were no GoPros.
That's
so we didn't document everything we did.
I feel like you're judging my GoPro use.
No, I'm
just
saying that I come from the era of film. We take pictures, and pictures are expensive, so you didn't take pictures of everything.
That's true.
So, yeah, you just don't have this avalanche of photos and raw footage.
It's all about the footage.
It's all about the footage.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, as always, for taking the time and tuning in to Safe on Deck. Hope you enjoyed this episode. It shouldn't need to be said, but just in case, I'll say it. The views and opinions presented on Safe on Deck are my own and those of my guests, and do not represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, the Department of the Navy, or its components. Be well, blue skies, and fly safe out there. See you next time.